Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech protected.
Welcome to episode 2 of The New Commons, and I'm John Michael DeMay here with my co-host Johanna Laurie, and we are very happy to have with us here today Kristen Reynolds, and especially because Kristen's going to be here talking with us about nonviolent communication, which we see as really central to the notion of the New Commons, a respectful public square, sort of rebooting and learning how to talk to each other in such a way as to not shut down inquiry and shut down curiosity, but to keep it going, keep the conversation going. So this is a little bit about Kristen. She attended the International Intensive Training for Nonviolent Communication in 2007 and completed a 2-year intensive program with NVC trainer Robert Gonzalez in 2013. She has studied group dynamics and conflict resolution from a variety of sources, including the Process Work Institute in Portland, Oregon, and the mediation training in Roanoke, Virginia. Some of her previous clients have included Unitarian Universalist Church in Roanoke, the Anahata Intentional Community in Floyd, and Portland Village School in Portland, Oregon. Welcome, Kristen.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for being here. We feel that episode 2 is perfect for this conversation because we can't really go forward. We love to talk about different things, including things that are fairly controversial, but we can't really talk about them unless we talk about talking and how to listen, because this is where we're trying to go. So can you tell us just a little bit more about yourself?
Certainly. Well, I'm new to New Hampshire. I moved here from Portland, Oregon a little over a year ago, so I'm still learning about my state, and I'm loving it so far. I've met some great people here. Took us a while to find a house, but we did. And so been fixing up the house, and I've been teaching some NVC here. So yeah, it's been great. It's been a good move.
Well, everybody wants to know what NVC really is. And so I wanted you to explain that to us and tell us a little bit about the history of it, short version of, and how widespread it is right now, and how you got interested in it. But I also had a question I wanted to ask you with regard to the name itself, because I realized that when I first heard the name, I thought, well, this can't apply to very much because it's talking about violence, and most communication that I'm familiar with is not violent. and then I began to think, well, when we talk about nonviolence, we're talking about pacifists, we're talking about physical aggression. And so here we must be talking about something else. We must be talking about what happens before there is physical aggression. So if you could kind of give an answer to that,
Sure,
that would help me
sure.
at least.
So a lot of people have talked about the name nonviolent communication, and sort of saying the same thing. Well, we're not violent, so what do you mean by that? But Marshall meant that before we get actually violent, we are using language that moves us in that direction. And violence, can, the way he meant it, violent meaning that you're meaning to try to get a rise out of the person. Your intention is to kind of turn the screw a little bit and poke them. You may not be consciously aware of that that's your intention, but everyone can tell when somebody has that intention as opposed to when they don't. So he thought of that as a violence when you were trying to push or poke someone verbally. And he realized that there are ways that people who are really good at mediation, or he'd go to indigenous cultures where their communication skills were at a very high level, and he realized that they had a way of talking that would never ever poke somebody. Even when they were upset with someone, they would never ever verbally poke them. And he codified that. He observed what was happening, and he broke it down into 4 steps. And he brought it back to, Western culture, because our language is just filled with all kinds of things that essentially shame people. Shaming is, like a hatchet. It's like a machine gun. It's somebody does. You can remember as a little kid, maybe you did one tiny little thing, and it only needed. My kid was so, just to jump into something, my kid was so sensitive to my feelings as a parent that I merely had to raise an eyebrow at him for him to self-correct. But a lot of people will just go right into this very heavy-handed, you're a moron, you're stupid, you'll never amount to anything. It's like it's meant to shame. And that is, what he really addressed.
Yeah, there's a coercive element too. If you really loved me, right? I mean,
You
it's. I mean, you're talking about some very overt versions of shaming, but it can be subtle or more.
It can be very subtle.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that it's what I spend a lot of time is teaching people about the subtlety, because what people run into is they'll be having to talk about something sensitive. They know it's sensitive. And they'll be on their best behavior, and they'll be doing everything they can possibly think of to not create a fight. They need to talk about this. Like if you're married, you've run into this all the time. You have to talk about the thing, whatever it is, an economic thing, and the person's liable to get upset with you. And so you're doing your best. And before you know it, it has turned into a huge fight. And you're thinking, how did it go from me trying to be perfectly nice to this big fight? Well, there's subtle things you said that did it.
This starts already as children, too. I'm thinking about when I was growing up with my sister. She was very sensitive to her middle name. So every time that I really wanted to get her, I would say, Kendra Louise. And she'd say, no, not Louise. So you start doing this before you can even think what it is you're doing.
Yeah, elementary and middle school stuff. But it's interesting how much it follows us around. Well, we're talking about nonviolent communication. I'm wondering if it would be helpful for you just to kind of lay out the 4 steps so people have a sense of.
Sure.
I mean, it's a formula in a way, but it's also a mindset, and so I know you'll talk about it in both senses.
Yeah.
But
so the 4 steps that Marshall was looking at was they're called observation, feeling, needs, and requests. Each one is a huge category, and one can spend a long time with each one of them, and they're all incredibly valuable for creating really clear language. And clarity, I think, is very important. A lot of times when we're talking, we're way muddier than we think that we are. So, do you want me to just go into what each of these means?
Sure, please. That'd be helpful, I think.
So, observation, which is the first step, is really how you first approach the topic. And it's a lot of times when people first approach something, they'll have a judgment. Why do you have to be so sloppy? You leave the dishes everywhere. Well, if you say it like that, you've put in a lot of judgments. You've put in that the person's sloppy. You've put in that they've left dishes everywhere. But that might not be the actual real observation. So if I were doing an actual observation, I would say, first of all, I would not say that the person was sloppy. That's an evaluation and not an observation. It's not neutral. Instead, I would say, you left 3 dishes in the sink, plus a couple of pieces of silverware on the counter, and then go on to talk about it. that's very neutral. Person can't argue with that. And it's not shaming. It's simply describing the situation that you now want to talk about. So that's observation. Then feelings, I might want to share my feelings. So I might say, seeing, the dishes in the sink, I feel tired and disappointed. Those are feeling words. So a lot of times, again, we can get mixed up with feelings and do evaluations and judgments instead of feelings. So feelings are truly like how you feel in your body. And I actually have a feelings list. Because a lot of times we're not used to talking about our feelings, and some people have a very limited vocabulary. So teaching people, this huge array of feelings that we have is really helpful. And what I'm doing is I'm inviting the person to understand me. That's the point of sharing a feeling, is an invitation to understand where I'm coming from, understand who I am. And then I want to say what my need is, which is a need is like my motivation, what I'm longing for. And so I might say, I am really needing, and I might even, say, knowing me, I'd probably say something like, I know it's odd, but for me to come into the kitchen and cook food, I really need for it to be clean first. It's somehow that blank slate of cleanliness really, helps me to be creative. And then the last step was my request, because I'm sharing all of this, I'm sharing myself, I'm being vulnerable to that person. Maybe, I'd like them to change their behavior. A request is truly that. It's a request. It's not a demand. It's not saying you have to do this. Most people don't respond very well to any kind of have-tos. And most of the time, your request is truly a request. You're asking for them to gift you a behavior. It's hard for people to change behavior, so it's truly got to be a gift. So I might say, would you be willing to clean all the dishes, when you're finished, so that I can come into the room and have it be completely clear?
And it's easy to see how each one of those steps is often missing in our communications. I mean, the word that comes to mind is cudgel. I mean, people are often using each one as a cudgel, starting with a judgment, and then when you were saying I feel, I was thinking of all the times you made me feel, right? You made me, you're upsetting me. You're doing this to me, rather than the way you expressed it with nonviolent communication was, this is something that's going on in my body, in my reality right now. You didn't put it on the other person, right? And
Right.
then you're pointing to a need or a value or motivation underneath, which we'll get into in much greater detail, and then making a request instead of a demand. Any of those things can derail a communication, whether you're communicating with your child, your parent, your friend, somebody out in the public square, whatever the case may be. In particular, we're talking about people that you want to maintain a connection with, create or maintain a connection with over time. I often think of this term that gets thrown around a lot these days. You disrespected me. Can you talk about, can you kind of like just deconstruct that for us? When somebody comes up to me or says to somebody else, you disrespected me. And I hear this in schools and parents saying this to kids, and what is actually going on there, and how would you reinterpret that through an NVC lens?
Okay, well, the person is trying to, I think they're trying to refer to something that happened. Something or other happened, and they are describing it as you disrespected me. So what I would say is, and of course, when you say you disrespected, you're claiming to know what's going on in the other person. So you're trying to describe what happened, and then you're making a claim about what you think was happening in that person's heart. And so chances are good that the person's going to respond very defensively, very negatively you know, if they're a teenager, they're going to stomp off because we hate it when somebody interprets what's going on inside of us. We especially hate it when it's not true. So when we say, you know, we have no idea what's going on in the other person, and that's the other part of nonviolent communication, is expressing yourself in a clear way, in a non-shaming way, but then the willingness to draw out or hear what's truly going on for the other person. So if I were the director of a movie and I were telling the actor, make a scene that you know, somebody just said you disrespected me, so what kind of scene would you make? The director would say, well, you need to give me a lot more information because I have absolutely no idea whatsoever what that might look like. So the person would, to be clear, the person would have to say, you didn't say yes, ma'am, when I finished talking. Well, now we have some idea of what that person is talking about, whereas before we truly don't. So that vagueness is difficult.
I think oftentimes, too, particularly with children, I live with 2 grandchildren, is that that's just a term that they have learned to say, and it kind of puts the other person off. It makes the other person think, and they don't really even know exactly what it means to respect somebody because they don't yet. But so we it's a learning. It's a long learning process, and it seems to me also that there's quite a bit of preparation you need for, in terms of thinking in the moment, in the situation, instead of just letting my feelings take over. How am I going to react to this other person when this other person is really pushing my buttons? You know?
It does. It does take a lot of training, and that's why, you know, I recommend that people do practice groups. You know, so I'll teach a class, or you know, I'll teach someone how to do this, but I'll say, but to really, really be able to do it, you're going to need to actually practice.
So before we take a deeper dive on the whole area of needs and feelings and motivations, I just want to ask you, how did you get into NVC in the first place? Where did you come across it? I mean, you talked about your training, but what was your first aha moment with NVC?
Yeah, well, at the time that I learned NVC, before I knew anything about it, I had just taken in a couple of little boys. They were foster children, but they were from extended families, so they were kids who I knew, but they weren't mine. And they came in, and it was, you know, they had come from all kinds of circumstances, and, you know, there's a lot that had to, you know, be figured out. And, you know, I was really curious how to communicate in a way that was kind and compassionate and really would hear them. And so I was reading a lot of books about communication. And I understood about feelings, sharing feelings. Most communication books will say, share your feelings, and I got that. What my aha moment was when I was in Santa Fe on a vacation, and it was Hiroshima Day, just by chance. They were having all these different activities that were promoting peace. This man, Jack Lehman, was doing a free class, a free workshop in the library, and I went. It was just a 2-hour workshop, but he talked about needs, that you shared your feelings, but then you had to share what the motivation was behind the feeling. So to say that you were sad or disappointed or angry was not enough. You had to say why. And, you know, and it was a particular kind of why. But that was the piece that was missing for me. It was so amazing that I went home, I read Marshall's book. This is Marshall's book, Nonviolent Communication. I read it, and then I started teaching it right away. You know, I just thought, people have to know this. It's so amazing. And I thought, even though I'm just a beginner, I have to get it out there.
Yeah, and they say you teach best what you most need to learn. Yeah, which has been kind of my, you know, statement to myself. It's like, okay, I'm a beginner, but hey, I want to learn this, so let's
Yeah.
get down there in the fray. And
But this other question of how long it's been around, has this been available for people for a long time or
Yeah,
not?
it has
Or-
been for quite some time. Marshall started this in the 60s, and he started the Center for Nonviolent Communication in 1984. So by then it was really going strong. It had, I think, he had managed to get around, many, many places in the country and the world, internationally known. So by now, it's what,
Very widespread.
60, 70 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it is widespread. Yeah, just about any city that you go to, you can find someone teaching NVC.
so let's take a deeper dive on this whole area of needs. And when I took the training, which would have been back in 2001, I think it was in Montreal. So I had to listen to a bunch of French and then English, or English and then French as they were translating. But the thing that really struck me, a couple of things that really struck me. One is that Marshall's statement that anything that's up for you is being pushed up by one of these universal human needs or values. In other words, when you're upset, you're not bad. It's not like there's anything wrong with you, but there's something that's being pushed up. Obviously, our way of dealing with it might be counterproductive, and we all know that because we've all been raised in this culture. And I remember him saying something like, we've had 3,000 years to learn how to control other people, and a lot of our bad habits as a culture come from that need, or that perceived need to control people, and certainly at least in the cultures that are like this, to control people by shaming and other kind of coercive manipulative tactics. But let's take a deeper dive, because this is revelatory. I think this whole realm of human needs, motivations, desires, values, and if you can just kind of give us a mini tutorial on what these things are and how they show up in our experience.
What the needs are.
Yeah, the universal human needs.
Universal human needs.
Yeah.
So the universal human needs are needs that any human being, anywhere in the world that they might be, any time that they might be, would still have this need. So something like needing love, needing connection. Of course, things like food and water, those basic needs. But then needing to have a meaning and purpose to life, needing to have community, friendship. These are all universal needs that anybody can understand. So, for instance, just a funny example, somebody says, I need a Ferrari. That is very specific. That's, somebody would have to be born at this time to have that, to say that. And they, might have to be in a particular country where Ferraris are available to say that. So it's not a universal need. It's just how it's what this person is wanting right now. However, if you talk to this person, what you would probably find out is that they actually have a universal need behind. The Ferrari is actually a strategy to meet a need, and the need might be status. Maybe they'd like people to look up to them. Maybe they'd like to, have people admire them. That's a universal need, to want people to admire you. And so now, if somebody says, I need a Ferrari, and you find out what I need really is admiration. I get that. I can understand that.
And it sounds like with a little bit more deep diving than perhaps we're taught, we can start to identify these more universal level of needs, and therefore have better strategies, because I guess it's a fairly well understood saw in modern culture that being rich doesn't make you happy. So having the Ferrari might get you status, or it might not. You might not be able to afford the repairs on it, and so you might lose your status. And what is status really at the end of the day? Is respect, or perhaps reputation, some combination being looked up to in the community, and there are many different ways of doing that. I think when we're younger, we tend to think of having things as that, because we haven't necessarily developed the internal perspectives.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that that's a whole other level above your initial reaction to this, which would be, why does this person want this anyway? He couldn't afford it anyhow. And then the one's own feelings of inadequacy or wanting respect and all. So I think most people, it'd be hard to get to this next phase of how do I analyze what's really going on in this situation, because you just react with your feelings to what is being presented to you.
Right. It's true that, that there is a reaction time. And what I'll tell people a lot of times is, if somebody says something and you get triggered, the likelihood that you're going to be able to do nonviolent communication is pretty low. Because when we get triggered, our brain shuts down a whole part of itself that's involved with this kind of analysis. And it goes to the fight-flight area, which is more the back of the brain. It starts moving into the arena of how can I protect myself, as opposed to how can I really listen to this person and hear what their motivation is, because that's all front part of the brain. That's, you really have to, be thinking and calm to be able to do that. So I do recommend that people take a few minutes to calm down. Maybe a whole day to calm down, right?
Even just to see whether they're being triggered or not. See if they can feel it.
See if they can feel it, right?
Yeah.
Because, but but to get back to the value of a need is, let's say that I'm talking to my husband, and my husband is wanting a new car. So just stay on this topic. But but from my perspective, there's no way we can afford a new car. So that could get into an argument that could last weeks, months, years even. However, if I am able to take the time to really listen to my husband and hear that need for admiration, maybe my husband goes to a job every day and feels ignored and unappreciated, and he worries that he's never getting promotions because he's not looked upon with the kind of admiration that would that he feels might be needed. If I understand that, I might be able to become his ally. What other way could we how could I help you achieve that kind of status? What other strategy could we use? And of course, it would help if he understood my worries around finances, trying to meet all the needs of the household, maybe the children, and my concerns. So if the two of us are both able to hear one another and we care about one another, then it becomes so much easier, because he can help me, by saying, yes, I want to help you with the finances. And I can help him by saying, yes, I want to help you at work with your status. Let's strategize.
So I know Marshall Rosenberg says we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, which suggests we should be listening, twice as much as we ought to be talking. And so you're pointing to a really important part, I think, of NVC, which I think maybe gets lost a little bit if people just come across the, what do I say? What do I say? Kind of orientation. And that's, our capacity to reinterpret. Marshall might say, listen with giraffe ears, but reinterpret what's coming at us. So, for example, let's keep going on the car scenario, right? Let's say, I come to you and, I say, I want this new car. And you're like, well, I don't think we can afford it. And let's say I'm feeling bad because of whatever happened at work. And it's just, I haven't really, let's say, unpacked a lot of what's really going on. And so maybe I'll just kind of get quiet and pout and go grab a beer and go sit on the porch. And so there's another way of, or a similar way of evoking empathy or encouraging listening or people to speak. And can you just give us an example in that case? Maybe we can do a little role play here. I'm sitting out on the porch with my beer, feeling bad. I'm feeling bad not only because of whatever the status issue might be at work, but because I'm feeling like you're not supporting me. So how would you use, say, the 4 steps, or just how would you approach that to try to coax me out? Because at that point, I'm assuming it's not about you making your points, but because you know what your points are going to be, but helping.
How do I listen? It's like
exactly.
How do I make it give an opportunity to really listen?
Yeah.
So I could go out on the porch and I could say, "You really seem upset," and I'm guessing that it's because of the conversation we just had around the car, and I feel really sad because actually I would love to say yes to that car because I love you and I want to give you all the things. I'd really like to hear what's in your heart about that car. I'd really like to hear why do you want this car so much?
Yeah, so that's a really excellent example of keeping the heart open and giving the person an opportunity to be heard and understood. And then I could come back to you with whatever it is that I'm feeling. Mm-hmm. Well, you just kind of cut me right off there, I could say. Because people who are angry have a charge built up, and they're not often going to just let it go right away. So what would be your next approach if I'm still feeling unsettled and angry?
Well, I mean, this is where it really helps for me to be in touch with myself and my own, sense of confidence and self-awareness. Because when you said you really cut me off, that could trigger me because you're making a statement about what I did. And like I said, people have a hard time with judging statements. We tend to have a lot of charge built up through many, many years of judging statements that parents and teachers and so on have done. So by the time we're adults, we usually have a high charge on.
But I thought it was sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Turns out words can hurt.
Words can hurt.
Yeah.
They can hurt. And so I would have to hear that. I might need to take a moment to get in touch with myself and just go, it's okay. I would have to remind myself that you're triggered and that you're going to say all kinds of things when you're triggered that aren't necessarily true. You're just upset. So my next thing that I might say is, you sound really upset, and maybe you didn't get a chance to really tell me much before because I was upset. But I'm feeling better now, and I would really like to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. So, it strikes me as I would really like to hear is both an expression of a need or an underlying value of wanting to keep that connection open, but also it's a request in that sense of that, observation, feelings, needs, requests. It's another request for, in this case, it's not a specific thing like please do the dishes or whatever, but it's more. It
is a request.
It's a request for connection, and that can be very powerful. I think because it opens up the space. Yeah. It literally creates space for a person to then step into if they're realizing that this person isn't trying to put me down, and it's not necessarily easy. We're not saying that we've got a recipe and this recipe is going to work in 5 seconds flat, and it can be a lot of toing and froing, and it's really a dance that we're talking about here between hopefully conscious individuals. The person with the NVC skills, it really falls more upon them in a sense to I think it's the way I look at it, and you can tell me if this doesn't feel right, but if we have those skills, it falls upon us to attempt to apply that level of awareness because we otherwise it can easily kind of devolve into something that's not working very well for us very quickly. It's easy to see that. So yeah, that's potent.
Sounds it's as I listen to both of you and how you're resolving this, though, I think for most people they'd feel rather daunted by trying this without having considerable practice in this.
Yes.
Because it's the business of getting triggered is immediate, and it is so habitual, as you say, and it's what you've learned as a child. It even goes back to other generations. This is how your family has
Yes.
been doing things for
Mm-hmm.
a long time. So it seems to me like that's it's easy just to get completely lost in trying on the one hand to be objective, and the other hand knowing that almost immediately you get subjective, and so is the other person. And so there you are, And if it isn't head-to-head in one situation, then something else will come up, and that happens so quickly, The person changes the subject, or a person triggers. I'm thinking about the man-woman thing as well, Women are supposed to be supportive, and men have this feeling that, well, I can hold out as long as I want to, And so you get into that sort of a dynamic, So it's quite something that trying to make this dance, as you're talking about, make this actually work.
Right.
Under
right.
difficult circumstances.
And one of the ways to create space could be, do you want to have some time alone now? We can talk about this later, or something like that, right? So there's because people can feel then, the charge is built up, and they're feeling like, I don't have a safe way to deal with this, even if you're being safe.
Yeah.
If my charge is there,
Yeah.
I'm going to hear what you say, but I'm not really going to hear what
Yeah.
you say. And so...
And you might also have this opinion that, well, you always think that you know how to do this, you know what I mean? The charge then continues because, you're just in your place where you don't want to hear this no matter what she's saying to you. So.
And we all know people like this, and we've probably been people.
We've been people.
Been people like this in the past. Well, as you were talking, it reminded me of the Eskimos have 30 words for snow or something like that.
Yeah.
And so they have ways of observing the world that we don't have in our more TV-ified culture. We have sleet and wet snow and good snow for skiing, or there's a few things, but we don't have their level of specificity. And the thing that strikes me about NVC is there's a whole language of feelings and needs that needs to be learned. And when you have that language, all of a sudden there's perception about, like, I'm just looking at the core feelings here. Looking at like mad, starting with just irritated and annoyed. It's just, it's not like it's like we have
Right.
if we only have 4 emotions, right? Glad, mad, sad, and fear, and shame maybe being a 5th. Then we don't have very much specificity to work off. But if we're looking at going from irritated, annoyed, frustrated, then up through agitated and impatient, disturbed, and then maybe we're getting halfway through, we're getting aggravated now, upset, peeved, and then angry, pissed off, exasperated, resentful, indignant, irate, enraged. And as we can identify where we are on this, or where another person is at, because part of that listening is, as you were saying, you sound upset or you sound hurt or whatever it might be. It's like the more that I can identify what I'm feeling, it's helpful to me. It helps to begin to resolve what is actually pushing up, because the feeling, right, is connected to whatever the universal human need is that's
that's not being met,
frustrated at that moment.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that for me in my personal life, this has been transformative, because it's meant that I've had the ability to bring up tough topics and have, now I have tremendous confidence. When I first started, it was hard, right? But now I have a lot of confidence. I know that I can talk to somebody about something that's difficult, that I'm probably going to be able to get into the conversation, talk about the thing, hear what's going on with the other person, and come to some kind of, happy ending many, many, many times. And, so I love knowing this language, while I had children, because I used this language with my kids all the time. And it just transformed my relationship with them. One of the things was to really learn how sweet my kids were. right? He had good hearts. But I wouldn't, it's like, it's not something you would necessarily know unless you take the time to really hear the motivation behind things. Like one time, one of my little boys came home and it's like, well, he said, I got sent to the principal's office. Now, when I was a kid, if I had said that, I would have gotten in trouble again. Mm-hmm. Nobody would have asked me why. Nobody would have had any interest in my perspective at all. It was like, you went to the principal's office, you obviously did something wrong, and now we'll punish you again. That's not helpful. Mm-hmm. It creates a very secretive kid, but it also creates a confused kid because they don't get a chance to process through what's going on for them or to understand what happened. So I had to calm myself down as a parent. You don't want to hear your kid say, well, I had to go to the principal's office, right? As a parent, it's triggering.
Well, you're talking about the words for these things, but what you're talking about more is time in a way, that you have the time inside yourself to take in what's just happened and not respond immediately,
right?
But to give yourself
and that person a
break,
a little space,
even if it's a small space,
even if it's just a small space.
Yeah.
So I said, well, how come? Why? Yeah. And he explained what happened, and I had to admit it sounded bad. I think he had said something to the teacher. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's like But I still was like, well, what was the need behind that? What did you need? And now, talking to children about needs is not easy because they haven't processed through stuff. They don't understand about process. It takes a little while, but we finally got down to it. And it turned out he had a beautiful need. He really wanted to help his classmates. He thought that they were being unfairly treated and he wanted fairness. He was trying to get fairness to happen in the classroom. So I said to him, I love that you wanted fairness. However, your strategy didn't work, did it? No, it didn't work. So let's you and I sit down and think of other strategies. How could you get fairness without having to go to the principal's office? And that was lovely because he got a chance to really think through what happened. He got a chance to process through. It was upsetting for him to have to go to the principal's office. I had a chance to see that my kid has a heart of gold. So it was great.
Yeah. Well, so I think we're beginning to talk about the situations in which this applies. And today, in today's world, it seems like we've got all kinds of good situations bad situations where this would be a good way to handle it. And I'm thinking about the divide that we have, the polarization on practically every topic, so that among adults, and then it filters down to children as well, because children hear this all the time, and they get into it. But so in a situation like this, where you have people just automatically cutting each other off if they have one point of view and the other person has another point of view, how do you deal in a situation like that? Because this is what we're facing in today's world.
Yes, and I want to just acknowledge that people are also being encouraged in this behavior by the people who are in leadership. So a person who's in leadership doesn't necessarily have to be a politician. They could be a person who's a celebrity. They could be a person who does the daily news. It could be a nighttime host, So whoever is, in authority or leader at the time, if they're encouraging people in this, very harsh, judging behavior, then people think they're doing a good thing by being harsh and judgmental. They think that they're doing the right thing. Most people, really, I'd say almost everyone, but there are exceptions, but almost everybody wants to do the right thing. They want to do good. If you talk to most people and you get down to the heart of what they want, what what you hear from them is, I want to be a good person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, but if they're being trained that to be good is to be judgmental or, wag a finger, that kind of thing, that's what they think it is, they're doing the right thing.
That's the problem that I see as well, is that people, is this self-righteousness aspect of it, because they come to the point where they think what they think is absolutely right and what the other person thinks is absolutely wrong.
Right.
And there's no discussion about any of it,
No.
not even an opening, not even what we might talk about this.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
so,
and unfortunately, it is deliberate.
Yeah.
It is deliberate, because if we don't have discussion, then we can't see each other's hearts. We can't, we forget that the other person is actually a wonderful person.
a person like me.
Right, a person like
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
And so it leads us down a path that is violent. So I mean it would be, when we do it with words, it's not as obvious. If our leaders were to say, I want you to take a one of those sponge bats, those a bat that a little kid would use inside, and every time you see someone who's doing the wrong thing, I want you to bat them with it, right? It's like, okay, you wouldn't cause blood, but it would be obvious to people that it's violent. If you took a foam bat and I batted you over the head, you wouldn't really get hurt, but it would be very obvious that I was being violent, which would actually help for both people to make it so obvious. But when people are using the words, they're not as aware of how violent they're being.
Mm-hmm. And it's somehow it's just encouraged, as you say. That's really being encouraged instead of the opposite. So
yeah, it's being encouraged, and because it's words, people are not as aware that, oh, I'm being encouraged to be actually violent. Yeah.
Not thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we talked last week a little bit about the algorithms in social media promoting this kind of knee-jerk, win-lose kind of thing, and because those obviously the purpose is to get clicks so that people will stay on the platforms, and they discovered that if people are angry and outraged, that's going to get the most clicks, and therefore it's molding behavior, and we see that people have gone from these long-form William F. Buckley kind of conversations down to, well, maybe we'll listen for an hour and an hour. Well, 10 minutes is most. Now it's 5 minutes. Now it's a minute. Now it's YouTube Shorts. If you can't say it in 45 seconds or 10 seconds, then you've lost the TikTok thing, whatever. It's a real diminution of the public square. And what we're trying to do here is, work on reintroducing this notion of the public square, the new commons. Let's talk about things that we have in common. It doesn't mean we can't talk about things that we're individually doing, but it does mean that we have a whole lot of areas where we can find agreement that are meeting basic universal human needs, whether that's a clean environment, clean food, clean water, clean air, and we're under kind of duress, extreme duress in many cases on many of these accounts. And so
as you're saying, with regard to the media, there's and to technology in general, the pace is just picked up and continues to pick up, so that people don't have almost a natural way of being able to reflect on things anymore. It's all a matter of responding, and that would relate to the flight and fright, the whole, that business of you're constantly in, major reaction mode instead of actually being able to take things in, to process them. And so in a sense, you have to reteach yourself how to do this, because if you've been watching TV a whole lot, or you're on video games like the kids are, then you're just geared to this one thing after another happening, and it's all just reactive. It's what they said and what you made me feel, and how bad and wrong you are. We can talk about this maybe briefly, Kristen.
just the idea of self-empathy as being a critical part, really, of learning how to do nonviolent communication. You've really said it several times pretty well. You said, like, I'll have to maybe step back and just give myself a little time to feel how I've been triggered or whatever. But can you say just a little bit more about self-empathy and how important that is to this whole undertaking?
Yeah, well, I think that self-empathy is especially valuable when you've been triggered, because there's this whole range of things that people have discovered who study neurobiology. There's this whole range of things that are going on inside the brain, and there's actual steps to calming yourself down enough so that you can you kind of use your whole brain, so to speak. And one of the things that they found is getting in touch with your own feelings and even naming your feelings. So, it's like a quick thing is if I'm triggered and I can take a moment to just even say to myself, wow, I feel really angry right now. And scared, actually. I'm feeling scared, and angry and frustrated. And I'm using those words. I can already feel inside myself calming. Just by saying what I'm feeling, it's like my brain is starting to come back online. And then if I can go one step more and just go, what is it that I'm really needing? And it's like, what I'm really needing is understanding right now. I would love to be understood. That's my longing. Please understand me, understand who I am. And if I can connect to both those things, then I'm really definitely feeling more centered.
Because you're beginning to understand yourself.
Exactly.
That's what's so important.
Exactly.
If you can understand yourself, then you can actually ask that of somebody else without putting these triggering messages out.
It is exactly so. Yeah. And so, it's I just love this communication. Mm-hmm. For the ability to get in touch with oneself and other people.
And this is why it's important to actually practice with other people, whether you're practicing what do I say in this situation in my life, or whether you're getting empathy back from another person. I think we had this discussion the other day. You were telling me that sometimes it's difficult to know what compassion for self is until you kind of feel it coming back from the other person, perhaps because our initial wounding around our self-compassion is, when other people have treated us badly, we've internalized that, I must be bad, nobody's going to listen to me, and then that creates a kind of, in its more extreme versions, a bull in the china shop kind of strategic thinking, or maybe strategic reactivity of how to get my needs met. I'm just going to, bang, 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 bang.
Right.
But speak a little bit to the utility of having a practice group for learning this, if you would.
I think that practice groups are just incredibly helpful. Not only do they help you to just kind of practice, saying what your needs are, saying what you feel, what your motivation is, saying what your feelings are. But, in the practice groups that I do, people share real things that are going on in their lives. And when you get a chance to share what's going on in your life to people who are truly empathetic, so there's a group there and everyone is listening, everyone is getting it. A lot of times people will go around the room and people will say, well, guess what your needs are, and you can tell from the guesses that they really listened, and that they empathized with, what you said. It's so transformative. It's like I call it de-triggering. It's like it takes the trigger away, like the button that, some people, all of us who have been, alive for any amount of time know that we have these big buttons. And if someone starts pressing on the button, we're going to react. It's just, it's our button, and we're going to react. Well, when you get a chance in a practice group to start talking about those things that, the button is pushing, the button can go away. You don't have a button anymore on that particular thing, and you can move. You can, if the longer you're in you've got people. It doesn't have to be a practice group. It could be anybody in your life who's willing to listen and help you process through whatever issue that comes up. So it could be a therapist, could be a counselor, could be a minister, could be your partner, just whoever is willing to listen and help you process. You'll find that you get fewer and fewer buttons.
And ultimately, though, I think you have to practice this on your own and then feel it. Because when you really know that you don't have the button is when you just don't feel the way you did when people pressed the button before. Suddenly you say, God, I don't have to do that.
There's just no button.
Yeah.
You don't have to be that way. And it's a revelation then. I mean, I went through this myself regard to anxiety, because I had a mother who was extremely anxious, and as a little child I just imitated her because I thought it might make her feel better. I wasn't even conscious I was doing that till later. But then I realized how much I'd internalized of all this anxiety.
Yes.
And letting go of this anxiety was such a feeling of, my gosh, why did I ever do this in the first place? Because I didn't need to.
And I'd love to talk more about this. This is so rich, and I really appreciate you coming on today. Well, we'll have you on again. But in the meantime, how can people learn more about NVC?
Sure. Well, I think that YouTube is full of amazing videos on nonviolent communication. So, for sure you can definitely go online. I do teach a version of it. I can't call myself a nonviolent communication teacher because I have too many other things that I include that I've brought from other modalities. Yeah. But there are, all kinds of trainers out there, people who've from the center, and so it's very available.
So how do they get in touch with you?
If they want to get in touch with me, you can email me at reynolds3000@hotmail.com.
All right, and if you want to comment on this show or give us some ideas, we are at questions@thenewcommons.tv. Thank you.